Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast presented by Full Press Coverage. Sap, we have so much to talk about today. Today was the NBA trade deadline day, and it did not disappoint because teams were busy from late last night until the deadline at 3 o'clock today. And we have some major moves that have really reshape the landscape of the NBA, especially in the Western Conference. So might as well start with the biggest one around 2 a.m. Eastern, 1 a.m. Eastern. Last night, the news came down that Kevin Durant was being traded to the Phoenix Suns in exchange for Mikal Bridges, Jay Crowder, 4 unprotected first-round draft picks, Cam Johnson, and TJ Warren is also going to Phoenix. So a massive trade that, in my mind, puts the Suns pretty squarely in the NBA Finals picture. Sap, let's start with this big one. What are your thoughts on that trade?
Well, I mean, I wasn't surprised that Brooklyn moved Kevin Durant, only because I think at some point Joe Tsai, the owner, who was essentially the Jeff Bezos of China, he's made his billions off of China's version of Amazon. So he's not going to be told what to do. And earlier in the week, I mean, this started off with the Nets trading Kyrie Irving to Dallas. And I think at some point Joe Tsai just said, enough is enough. I'm going to trade Durant, get it over with, start the rebuilding process, and move on from here. And I think what happened was Phoenix in the offseason was one of the teams that probably had some discussion with Brooklyn about Kevin Durant. So I think the groundwork was already laid so that when we got closer to the trade deadline, they could execute this fairly quickly, and that's what they were able to do. Look, I cannot recall a player of this caliber moving at the trade deadline. Usually when someone of this caliber is traded, whether it was Kevin Garnett in 2007 or, Moses Malone back in 1982 or whoever, Kareem back in the mid-'70s, it's in the off season, right, where there's plenty of time to marinate and make the deal, and then you start the season fresh with that new great player. At the trade deadline, to have Kevin Durant go from Brooklyn to Phoenix, Eastern Conference to Western Conference, that's monumental. And you're right now in Vegas, the Boston Celtics remain the betting favorite to win the championship. Phoenix is now number 2, and this is a team that's essentially been a 500 team this year. But you put Durant with Chris Paul, Devin Booker, DeAndre Ayton, that's a powerhouse. Now, again, the tough part of this, Jet, is when we get to May, maybe even June, how will Chris Paul and Kevin Durant be? Chris Paul's approaching 38. He's almost as old as LeBron James. Durant's approaching 35. Both of those guys were banged up, in the postseason last year at some point, or didn't seem to be themselves last year in the postseason. So that's a big question mark. Those two guys are old, but they still got Booker and DeAndre Ayton. So that gives them a tremendous foursome there in Phoenix. They didn't have to part with any of their stars. And in terms of Brooklyn, what they got back in return, I think the big thing is the draft picks, because the 4 first-round picks are 23, 25, 27, and 29 in the years. 2027, 2029, I don't know what the Phoenix Suns are going to be. Most likely, Chris Paul and Kevin Durant will be retired, so Phoenix may be a bottom feeder. Those picks could be very, very valuable. So Brooklyn maybe is trying to set themselves up for the future.
Yeah, I think, Sap, that we're going to have to do a post-mortem on the Brooklyn Nets, Kevin Durant, Kyrie era, probably, maybe next week or maybe even tomorrow.
James Harden.
Because there's so much to talk about there. And I really do want to sort of dig into everything that happened there. But because so much has happened today, we don't really have time to get into everything there. But I will say that I totally agree with you in that it is shocking that a player of Kevin Durant's caliber gets traded at the deadline. And not just that it all came together seemingly in just a few days, because, nobody this time last week, we were talking about Kyrie's trade request, and that was right about when it happened, Sap. So really before that, so about, 8-9 days ago, no one had any inclination that the Nets were going to be anything other than, going for trying to win a championship once Kevin Durant got healthy, because they were playing really good basketball. And so, everything changed in Brooklyn in really the matter of a week, where they're now in a complete rebuild, but they don't have their own picks. Now they have Phoenix's picks down the line. They have a bunch of, their roster is, fine. They have a bunch of solid NBA players, obviously no one resembling a star or an all-star. But it's going to be a lengthy process for them. A big beneficiary of this trade too is the Houston Rockets, who in that James Harden trade got a lot of Brooklyn's picks, and presumably Brooklyn will be pretty bad, Sap.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of moving parts with this trade, not just because Kevin Durant went from one team to the other, but the Rockets are going to benefit from this. Other teams in the East are now going to vault over Brooklyn because presumably they're going to fall way the hell off here. And maybe in the offseason, Brooklyn sells even more because they do have a lot of NBA veterans who are valuable, not necessarily pieces you want to build around.
Right. You good role players, right? You're talking about Mikal Bridges, who's a nice piece. Cam Johnson, guy can come off the bench and score. You got Spencer Dinwiddie, who's a really good player. So there's so many different things that you can add. But that's why future first round picks are always a question mark, because we don't know how that team's going to be in a few years. On the surface, those Phoenix picks look like they may be useless. Yeah, maybe in 2023 and maybe in 2025, but in 27 and 29, those could be very valuable. And like you said, the Brooklyn picks that are going to go to Houston look like they'd be late first round picks. Well, now they could be lottery picks. I think somehow Brooklyn will still make the playoffs because they've built a decent record so far, and they still have some good players there that they're getting in return, and they'll play defense too, right? I think that's what will get them to win some games that maybe a lesser team would. So maybe those picks going into this year may not be as valuable, but maybe down the road they will be. I also wonder if Brooklyn is going to be a place where it's not going to be a destination for players in free agency, because we know how much respect the players have for Kyrie Irving. So he's already bad-mouthing
God
Brooklyn.
knows why. Yeah.
Right. It's an amazing story. But other players may say, you know what, I'm not going to go to Brooklyn because Kyrie Irving had a bad experience there. It could be the case. As crazy as that sounds, that could be the case. He's that respected and loved by his fellow players. So that's something else that Brooklyn's going to have to look into. But I cannot recall a player of this caliber getting traded at the trade deadline. It just doesn't happen.
No, it doesn't. And the other subplot in this too is that the Suns have new ownership, and the day he took over, Matisheba, replacing Robert Sarver, he buys a team. 12 hours later, he trades for one of the biggest stars in the history of the game. So a pretty cool first day on the job for Matt Sheba. And something else that I saw Isaiah Thomas, not the Pistons Isaiah Thomas, but the former Celtic Isaiah Thomas, tweeted out he was a former Phoenix Sun. And I thought he made a good point saying, with Sarver out of there now, and now you have Durant, and they're presumably going to start, winning some games. Maybe they'll make a run to the finals. Maybe they win a title this year. They should, for the first time ever, really be able to attract free agents because it's a warm destination. Everybody knows that the training staff there is first rate and has been for a long time. Everybody loves the coach there, and the owner seems like he's very invested in it. So it could be a big time free agent destination. So that comes into play with those picks. Maybe Phoenix is able to, those guys retire and they just reload via free agency.
Sure.
There's a lot going on here with the new ownership too. And it would be really stick, I'm sure, in Robert Sarver's craw if the Suns were able to win a championship this year. And that would be a very, very funny subplot to this trade too.
Yeah, and it's a short flight to Vegas and a short flight to LA, two of NBA players' favorite cities, right? Matt Ishbia paid $4 billion for the Phoenix Suns. So that makes you think what the Lakers, Golden State, the Celtics, the Knicks, those real even more valuable franchises would be worth in the open market. $4 billion for the Suns, and he's come in and made his mark right away, getting Kevin Durant. I was shocked when I heard this. I was listening to Fox Sports Radio, which I do a lot at night. I kind of, one of these, when you get to my age, sometimes you sleep for 2 hours, you wake up and you're up for an hour, then you go back to sleep. And I like some of their programming. I think Ben Mallet does a really good job overnight. And a lot of their program I actually like. And I dozed off, woke up, and this story was breaking. I'm like, is this a dream I'm in that Durant got traded? But I do think that the groundwork was laid in the offseason. Because remember it had to be, right? Because Durant, this is where he wanted to go. He wanted to go to Phoenix. And Kyrie, I'm sure the Nets explored destinations for Kyrie back in the offseason so that when Joe Tsai gave the go-ahead of let's move on from these two guys, that there'd already been some groundwork done so that, Sean Marks was able to get a hold of the powers to be in Dallas and in Phoenix and get this done. And again, it's good for the Celtics because although I think the Celtics own the Brooklyn Nets, They didn't end up going to the Eastern Conference, these two great players. They went to the Western Conference, which now is really a free-for-all. Denver has the best record in the West, but now obviously Phoenix and Dallas are contenders. The Clippers are kind of that team that's kind of lurking there that people still fear, because if Kawhi and Paul George are healthy, they can be an issue. So now the West is that much deeper than it was, 24, 48 hours ago.
Absolutely. And, typically we would spend an entire show talking about, how this impacts the West and the finals race and the Suns and so much stuff, because it is such a monumental trade, but so many things happen. So we got to move on. We're going to talk about all this, the fallout from this in, I'm sure, the weeks and months to come, Sap, because these are some really game-changing trades. But I do think, the Suns definitely a big winner at the trade deadline. How could they not be? Another team, and it pains me to say it, Sap, that I think was a big winner from this trade deadline was the Los Angeles Lakers. I think they did a really, really good job for themselves. They made a couple of moves. They didn't necessarily bring in, a huge star player, but they made a couple of moves without giving up all that much to really improve the whole roster. It started when they traded Russell Westbrook yesterday and in a three-way deal, and they got back former Laker D'Angelo Russell from the Timberwolves and Malik Beasley and Jared Vanderbilt from the Jazz. They gave up Juan Toscano Anderson and Westbrook, as I mentioned, and a lightly protected first-round pick. And then today they made another deal sending Patrick Beverley to the Magic for Mo Bamba. Beverly's probably going to get waived. Mo Bamba hasn't really played all that much in the Magic rotation, but a former high lottery pick. A lot of potential. They got rid of Thomas Bryant because he wasn't happy with his playing time, so Bamba is going to step into that role. And Sap, am I missing any other move that they made today?
No, that's pretty much it. D'Angelo Russell, I think, is a really good addition. He's shooting 39% from three-point line this year, and that's what they needed. They needed some three-point shooting. Westbrook is, in the high 20s as a three-point shooter. It was just time to move on from Westbrook. I think he kind of had this black cloud over the franchise, although I think he played pretty well this year and accepted his role. Give him credit for that. But it was time to move on. D'Angelo Russell's much younger, more explosive offensively. So I think that LeBron can kind of integrate him in the offense and get a lot out of him. Better shooter without question. And they need as many good shooters as they can. And Mo Bamba is an intriguing type player, right? And again, LeBron throughout his career has had a tendency of making guys better, not necessarily with the roster he had in LA this year, but maybe these new pieces will help the Lakers get along. Yeah, a lot of teams in the West got better. The only disappointment for me is Denver, who I picked to win the title before the season started, really didn't do much, right? And they have the second best record in basketball, the best record in the Western Conference. They kind of are just there, and that's probably disappointing in their locker room when they see other contenders adding Durant or Kyrie Irving. Not that they'd have to go get those types of players, but at least add something to push back a little bit, because now it's really wide open. It looked 2 days ago like Denver was the favorite in the West, but now I think Denver and Phoenix are probably the co-favorites, and then some other teams that could really improve and make their mark. And again, we can never forget the Golden State Warriors, because if they're whole, they have so much experience and that winning DNA that you can't count those guys out either.
Sure. And Sap, you're the resident Lakers guy because LeBron's on that team. And what this reminds me of was a few years ago when LeBron was on the Cavs, and at the deadline they sort of traded almost their entire roster, remade the roster on the fly.
Sure.
And they obviously, they went to the finals as they always did when LeBron was on the team. That's why I think they're a winner today. They didn't really give up all that much, but they remade the roster into a roster that fits LeBron's skill set a lot more. The roster makes a lot more sense. We talked about at the beginning of the season, Sap. We looked at the team and said, this roster it doesn't make sense. It's not a well-constructed team. And now it's a lot better constructed. They have guys that fit LeBron's skill set more, in that they're three-point shooters. There's, specialists, some guys who are going to play more defense. And so just giving up a lightly protected first-round pick was really all it took for them to sort of remake this roster. I think Bamba is an interesting fit too, because he can shoot threes as well as protect the rim, and he still has, he's got potentially still young, and so he's somebody that I could see really develop his role more on the Lakers than he was on the Magic, and will benefit from playing with LeBron. So I think they did a really good job. I don't know that any of these suddenly make them into title contenders, but they're a lot better today than they were, yesterday, Sap. And I think that that's got to make LeBron and Anthony Davis and Lakers fans happy.
Yeah, they're not that far off. They're 13th in the West, right? So that sounds like a disaster. Only Houston and San Antonio are below them, but they're only a few games out of being in the sixth slot, which would
Right.
be in the playoffs, right? They wouldn't have to go in the play-in. And you look, there's got to be 7, 8, 9 games this year that they lost that they should have won. Both games against the Celtics, they were in control to win those games, and they ended up losing them. Even the other night against OKC, they many opportunities to win that game, and they just couldn't seal the deal. They've had, like I said, 7, 8, 9 games where they just kind of blew it at the end. Bad defense, bad offensive possessions, missing a free throw here, whatever. They could be that much better. So I think, if they just button things up, tighten things up, play a little better defense, and have some options on offense, that they can be that much stronger. The interesting thing is, and again, this is all fluid, Russell Westbrook going to Utah, of all places, where he's actually had fights with fans,
Yes.
is the most interesting part of the trade deadline. I know Kevin Durant getting traded is certainly more interesting, but Russell Westbrook going to Utah is fascinating. I don't think he's going to go there, right? I would
I don't
think
even know if he's going to get on a flight to Salt Lake City.
No. I mean, the All-Star game is going to be there in 9 days, and he's not going to make the All-Star game. So, yeah, they're going to obviously probably waive him, buy him out, whatever. And the latest rumor is maybe the Clippers. So he stays in LA, just changes uniforms from, purple and gold to blue, and goes with the Clippers, which would be interesting, right? Because you know how Westbrook thinks that he's a guy that's plays with a lot of passion. So I'm sure going to the Clippers would be his first choice. So that could be an option as well.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, like I said, I don't think he's going to even make the trip to Utah. They have no interest in him. He has no interest in them. So yeah, it's certainly a buyout candidate. The Clippers, like you mentioned, the Heat, another team to keep an eye on too. He fits that sort of Heat culture perfectly. And so that could be another team where I could see him ending up, but it will be interesting to see. But today, I think, like you said, you said the Lakers aren't that far off, even though it looks like they are, just by the standings, and they're a lot better constructed of a team today than they were yesterday. So I think that they have to feel good about that. We'll just get into some other trades. Sap, the Toronto Raptors acquired Jakob Poeltl from the Spurs, a guy that a lot of teams were interested in. They send Kem Birch a 2024 first-round pick and 2 second-round picks to San Antonio. The Celtics were interested in Poeltl, but offered, purportedly, according to Brian Robb, Peyton Pritchard, Gallinari, and a second-round pick. That wasn't enough to get it done, so Toronto gets Poeltl. I don't know what Toronto is necessarily what mode they're in right now. They've had sort of a disappointing season. Poeltl's a free agent at the end of the year. This was kind of confusing to me, Sap, but I don't think he's a big enough player to like sort of warrant, okay, is this going to change their outlook over the season?
Right. We thought they'd be in sell mode. Instead, they added this piece. So, who knows what they're going to do from there. The thing is, there's really only 4 teams that are out of the playoff picture right now. So everybody else the Lakers are 13th in the West, and yet they're only a few games from being in the play-in and only a few more games from being the 6th seed in the West. And you see that also in the East with teams like Toronto and Indiana. So, everybody was kind of on hold. Plus, you move the trade deadline to February 9th. It normally would be later in February or early March. Now, I think the league struck gold by moving the trade deadline to February 9th. Now, whether it was planned or not, I don't know, or it was just dumb luck, because this is the week of the Super Bowl. We're 3 days away from the Super Bowl, and all everyone's talking about is trades in the NBA. We're not even talking about the Super Bowl, which is 3 days away. It's about Durant going to Phoenix and Kyrie going to Dallas. So good for the NBA, who has a rivalry with the NFL, right? That's the rivalry among the pro sports, because baseball's a regional sport, hockey's a regional sport. And look, the NFL had 3 games scheduled on Christmas Day, which is always been the NBA's day. So maybe the NBA is trying to push back a little bit by having a trade deadline on February 9th. And then when these trades happened, they took a lot of steam away from the Super Bowl. Look, the ratings will still be spectacular on Sunday between the Chiefs and Eagles. Football's king by far, but a good week for the NBA.
Without a doubt, it was every sports radio program in the country, with the exception of probably Philadelphia and Kansas City, was leading with NBA stuff today. So I think that you're right that there is a rivalry, even though football is still king. I don't think anybody could debate that, but the NBA certainly has had a really strong week in terms of getting eyeballs and social media activity, and we already know how the NBA, as dominant as the NFL is in terms of, TV ratings and stuff like that, the NBA in the digital world, the social media world, Instagram, Twitter is that dominant. So they continued to do that with these moves. Sap, the Rockets acquired John Wall from the Clippers. So the Clippers are done with John Wall. That's a minor 3-team trade. He's probably going to get waived. The Clippers got Eric Gordon back, so he'll be of value to them. Luke Kennard goes to the Grizzlies. Danny Green goes also to the Rockets. He's going to get bought out. The John Wall experiment didn't really work out.
No, I mean, so they got rid of a washed-up athletic guard, and maybe they'll bring in another one in Russell Westbrook. And if he doesn't work out, maybe they'll bring in Derrick Rose. I always kind of put those three guys together: uber athletic point guards. Westbrook's a Hall of Famer. Rose is a former MVP. Westbrook, obviously, a former MVP. Wall had a nice career. But again, those types of players, they only last so long because the injuries start to mount. And when that happens, they lose their athleticism, and that's what they really rely on. Whereas more skilled guys like Steph Curry and Chris Paul can play deeper into their career because it's not based solely on athleticism. So, John Wall's had a nice career, is a really likable guy, right? Done a lot of charity work. He's loved in Washington. We'll see where he goes from there. So it's just kind of a maddening day because it seemed like every trade involved 5 second-round picks.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about.
Well, I thought Bill Belichick was involved in these deals because it was like all second-round picks. I'm like, what are these things all about? I mean, other than what Nikola Jokic was a second-round pick, I mean, what do you get in the second round generally?
Yeah, it's weird. This hasn't really happened before where there was like a premium on second round picks and there was a massive premium on second round picks today for whatever reason. I think 3 separate teams traded 5 second round picks in respective deals, which is very, very strange. One of them is the defending champion Golden State Warriors get a key piece from last year back from the Portland Trailblazers, Gary Payton II. He's going back from Portland to Golden State for 5 second round picks. Okay. I mean, he didn't really end up doing that much in Portland, but we saw how effective he was in the finals and in the playoff run last year. So that's I guess a good move for the Warriors. They don't give to what's about second round picks. The Warriors also cut bait finally with James Wiseman, Sap, the second overall pick in what was it, 2 years ago, 3 years ago? And
2020, it was the year after Zion.
Yeah, and so he is he was either hurt, out of the rotation, showed flashes, couldn't really figure out what they were going to do to him. So he ultimately gets moved from the Warriors to the Pistons. The Pistons, and part of that move, trade Saddiq Bey. And then Saddiq Bey, I think, ended up on the Hawks.
For 5 second round picks.
5 second round picks.
Yeah.
So that's an under the radar trade, but it's interesting in that I like Saddiq Bey. He's lit up the Celtics a few times. And James Wiseman, is 21 years old, former second overall pick, and just couldn't crack the rotation with a really good Warriors team. Obviously, defending champions. I think that Detroit's probably a pretty good landing spot for him, Sap.
Right. They're one of the 4 teams that's not in playoff contention. And, maybe he can develop his game, get healthy, whatever the case may be. Sometimes a change of scenery works for some players and you go from there. Like Kate Cunningham's missing this season. So, they could be in real contention to get the first overall pick and end up with Victor Wembanyama. And again, if you add him to Kate Cunningham and Jaden Ivey, and if Wiseman develops, now you got Detroit looking at a really bright future. So that's what you do. You try to bring in talent and maybe moving from one spot to the next will improve a player's performance. I thought an interesting deal also was Jay Crowder ending up in Milwaukee because that's the perfect player for the Bucks. Jay Crowder's not quite the same player as PJ Tucker. I don't think he's as good a defender, but again, that wing defender who's solid, can hit the corner 3, has played in a ton of playoff games. Seems like wherever he goes, the team wins. I think that's a nice piece. He'll fit right into Milwaukee to give them some depth. I thought that was also a nice move because he was not going to play with Phoenix. He was part of the Durant trade, and quickly Brooklyn moved on from him. At this point, though, with Brooklyn, just circle back to them. I mean, is Cam Thomas going to lead the league in scoring at this point? Because
he might.
He scored 134 points over a 3-game period. There's not a lot of scoring left on Brooklyn. I mean, supposedly their best player is Ben Simmons, who I don't know what he's going to do there now. I mean, now that no one's really focusing on the Brooklyn Nets, all of a sudden Ben Simmons wakes up and starts playing like Ben Simmons should play? Yeah, because there's going to be no focus on them, so the pressure is off. I don't know. But Cam Thomas is someone who, is really lighting it up. So, again, nice building block for Brooklyn.
Yeah, green light is for Cam Thomas going forward. He's got as much of a green light as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, it's more than Durant had, because Durant was a guy that, I'm talking about him in past tense, but he's a guy who's so efficient. That's why he will go to Phoenix and fit in perfectly. That'll be seamless. He's the easiest superstar to play with. And I think Chris Paul now is going to feel like an NFL quarterback who, comes down the court, and on his left, he's got Durant, and on his right, he's got Devin Booker. It's going to be like a quarterback with, Devontae Adams on the left and Justin Jefferson on the right. I can throw to either of these two studs, and we're going to move the ball down the field. They're going to be tough to deal with. And then you get DeAndre Ayton. If his head's screwed on, that's a really good fourth option. And again, we both love Monty Williams, and I think he's the guy that can make this all work. I'm sure Durant respects the hell out of Monty Williams. They're going to be tough to deal with. It's just the big question with Phoenix is, how healthy will Chris Paul be, and how healthy will Kevin Durant be when we get to April, May, and maybe June?
Yeah, health and depth. That's going to be the two issues for the Phoenix Suns. They traded away their depth to get Kevin Durant. You do that, every day of the week, twice on Sunday. I don't think anybody is saying, "Oh, you shouldn't have traded away your bench depth to get, arguably a top, 15 all-time player." You do that every day, for sure. But that's why also, Sap, it's so interesting that it happened in the middle of the season, because typically when you make a trade for a superstar of Kevin Durant's caliber, a 1A type player, you're building your roster around them too. And because of when this happened, the Suns didn't really have the chance to build out their roster, sign free agents who want to come play with Kevin Durant, make other minor deals. And so, you see that in the offseason that, okay, this leads to, we're now going to sign this free agent, that free agent, and really sort of build a team around them. So it's sort of doing it on the fly, which is, I kind of want to say, unprecedented. Now, they were in the finals 2 years ago. It's not like, this team is trying to go from nothing to something. They have obviously plenty of playoff experience, even though they flamed out last year. But the fact that they're trying to do all this and sort of go from a team that looked like they were having a very disappointing season to a team that's now, as you mentioned, Sep, the second favorite to win a championship behind the Celtics. It's sort of a unique experiment.
It really is. You're right. Because I keep, like rattling my brain to think of a player of this caliber moved at the trade deadline. Like Shaq was moved at the trade deadline, but he was like 8 years past his prime and 50 pounds too heavy. Like that. I think he went to Phoenix, and then the Celtics get him at some point near the trade deadline. I mean, he was Shaq, but he wasn't Shaq. Durant's still a top 10 player, right, in the league. I mean, he was off to a fantastic start. He was in the MVP discussion. Then he got hurt. So he's still a lethal scorer. So I just can't think of anybody of that caliber being traded at the trade deadline. So now maybe you look to the buyout market, and what else you can do, because you're right, Jet. That's a great point. When the Celtics went out and got Ray Allen and Kevin Garnett, I mean, their roster was essentially Pierce, Garnett, Allen, Rondo, and Perkins. And we didn't really know about Rondo and Perkins because they were young guys, and the rest of their team was god awful. But they had a chance in the offseason to add to that bench. Now you're kind of doing it on the fly. This is going to be uncharted territory for the Phoenix Suns, but James Jones is one of the best GMs in the sport. You got Monty Williams, who I think can handle this. And now you've got an owner in Matt Ishiba, who, paid $4 billion for this franchise. Heck, he was a walk-on backup point guard at Michigan State. So he's all in.
Maybe he'll be on the bench.
He might be on the bench. That might be the case. Why not? I'm trying to think of other older sons that can come out. Maybe Barkley, who still needs that ring to fill out his career, might come out of retirement at 60 years old and, 50 pounds overweight, and maybe he'll come out and help things out. Dan Marley probably in still pretty good shape. Maybe Kevin Johnson can come back and back up Chris Paul. All the old sons can come back to help.
What's interesting about Barkley, and that, everybody obviously loves him, and he's such an entertaining person, but I think some people rag on him occasionally for his analysis because he doesn't know all the NBA players, and sometimes he complains about being in there late night and stuff like that. I will say this. For months, he's been saying this is going to be a huge trade deadline. Everybody's going to be super active, and they kind of poo-pooed him, and he was dead on. He read those tea leaves accurate because, I mean, everybody was super active. It seemed like with the exception of the two teams that stand at the top of their respective conferences, the Celtics made a very minor move, trading for Mike Muscala, trading a couple of second-round picks, as everybody did, and Justin Jackson. And the Nuggets traded away Bowens Highland and didn't really get anything.
Why did
back
they do that, Chet? That surprised me.
I guess, does he have an issue with coaching there or what? And the
Not
role,
enough minutes.
I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I don't,
He's a good
don't
young
get that.
player. They didn't really get good value for him. I think they got like 3 second-round picks. And he was a first-round pick a couple of years ago. He's automatic points off the bench, has showed flashes. I don't get it either. I texted you immediately after the Suns trade, I think, or we've been talking about this for months, that I thought the Nuggets should have been all in on Kevin Durant, whatever it takes outside of Jokic. So I don't really understand what the Nuggets did. The Celtics were in a better position to stand pat, because obviously they went to the finals last year. They're a little deeper than the Nuggets, and the no one else in their conference made a major move, other than, if you consider the Nets making a major move, but a major move to get worse. So I think the Celtics are very, very invested in the buyout market and seeing what they could do there. The Nuggets may well be too, but I mean, they're seeing a couple teams in their conference really now threatening them, and they traded away one of their better scoring options. So a curious deadline for the Nuggets. The Celtics, I get that a deal didn't present them. They didn't have to feel desperate. I would have liked them to address some wing depth, but maybe they do that in the buyout market, especially now Jaylen Brown's going to be out for, I don't know, at least a couple of weeks. He broke his face. So we'll have to see.
And you're not exaggerating either. That's essentially what happened. I mean,
he did.
A fracture of whether it's his cheekbone, his orbital bone, his nose. We don't know the exact.
I didn't realize
location.
that his dad was a boxer, and so he's I mean, like he got right up from it too. He went to the locker room, but no. And then you're like, oh, maybe he bruised it, and they're like, no, he broke his face.
I thought he was concussed. Obviously when you get hit,
that's what I thought too.
No, that's one thing I love about Jaylen Brown. Of all the Celtics, he very rarely ever complains about officials' calls. He's the anti-Grant Williams or Jason Tatum.
Yeah,
he is. When he showed up in camp, I said he looks like Khalil Mack out there. He's a big, strong guy. Again, sometimes with that body type, and this has nothing to do with body type, this injury, this is an accident, but he's had some hamstring issues. And again, he's a big, strong kid. And sometimes when you're built like that, you're going to have some issues. He's obviously not as big as Zion, but big, strong athletes like that have issues because, he's very muscular and built almost like an NFL tight end. But yeah, I hope that he takes time to recover, skips the All-Star game. He can still go to the All-Star festivities, because who the hell would want to be in Salt Lake City in February? It seems like an appealing place. So go to that, but don't play. Let's hope that isn't the case. I don't want to have him do what Kemba Walker did or Kyrie Irving did, where they miss games leading up to the All-Star game, playing the All-Star game, and then the rest of the season they're not quite right. To me, that's a massive turnoff. That's a massive turnoff if you're a fan of the team. So hopefully keep him out through the All-Star break and then see where he's at after that. Because that's going to be an adjustment playing if he has to wear a mask, to protect whatever area it is.
I assume he's going to have to.
Sure.
I don't know how
he have to go all Rip Hamilton on us, right?
Yeah. I feel bad for him, not just because of the injury, but, he's worked really hard to become an All-Star again, and now he's probably going to miss the game, which sucks. But, Sap, again, Denver, Memphis, those are the two top teams in the Western Conference. They didn't do anything today to get better. Boston, Milwaukee got Jay Crowder. Celtics didn't do anything other than Muscala, who's really an end of the bench 3-point shooter. Are you surprised that the teams who were on top of their conferences before we get out of here didn't do anything to try to extend their lead in those conferences?
Can't Milwaukee sell this that Chris Middleton's played 315 minutes this year, their second best player, and you would think that the final third of the season that he's going to be available, and by the postseason he'll be Chris Middleton of 2 years ago when they won the championship, right? So you would think that, and we've been waiting for Chris Middleton all year. And I tweeted out earlier, and you liked the tweet. How in the hell is Giannis not the leading MVP candidate? I mean, his team is 37-17. You're right. He's only a game and a half behind the Celtics. I say the Bucks are only a game and a half behind the Celtics. His second best player has played 315 minutes, and the guy's averaging 32, 12 and a half, and nearly 6 assists. And he's the best or one of the 3 best defensive players in the league. How is that not the MVP? Like I'm like scratching my head, but you're right. It's, you would think there'd be fatigue with Jokic, who's one of the favorites now, and Luka's obviously there, and Tatum and Embiid, and a half a dozen true candidates. I get that, but maybe
is it a flashy thing? Is it because he's not flashy at all?
And he's not part of the club. He's just not. But neither is Jokic either, though. I mean, right. So they're both foreign guys who didn't go through AAU and whatever. So.
Yeah, they're mopping the floor with the league. The two of those guys.
You can make a case they're the 2 best players in the league. I mean, Luka seems more part of the club than Giannis, doesn't he? I mean, although he's a fierce competitor as well, but I think he's just different. But I don't get. Well, again, it can't be really the players' fault. It's the media, and we're all part of that. And people are polling who's the favorite to win the MVP. Are they just forgetting about Giannis? I mean, it's almost kind of like LeBron. I mean, LeBron only has 4 MVPs. He should have more. So should Jordan, by the way. I mean, those guys could have won the MVP every year they played.
Sure.
They were clearly the MVP of their team, the league, the whole thing. But yeah, there's maybe fatigue there. But maybe Milwaukee's just painting it that Chris Middleton will be back, and that's going to be our addition. We see this in baseball all the time. Certainly the Red Sox do this all the time. Well, Chris Sale's going to come back in the second half of the year, so that's our trade deadline addition, and he pitched 5 2/3 innings last year. But yeah, that's maybe the way they look at it. I was happy the Celtics didn't really make moves. I think they're fine. It's obviously the key is the health of Horford and Rob Williams. That's very important. And now with this Brown injury, which came, a day before the trade deadline, maybe they needed to address some wing depth, and Muscala can give them a little bit of that. He's kind of a stretch 4 guy who can hit some threes. But as far as Denver, it's disappointing because they've never been to the NBA Finals, and they've got a very wealthy owner in Stan Kroenke. It's not like
and pieces to make a big trade. Pieces, they have first round picks, second round picks, which obviously are very valuable in the league, apparently.
Exactly. But Bill Belichick won some of those second round picks from the NBA. He's probably working on that right now.
So I was disappointed, but Sep, all right, we got about like a minute and a half left here. Who now, after all this dust is settled, who's winning the NBA championship?
Celtics.
Who are they playing?
I think the best team. I think they play Phoenix, and that would be.
So you're switching your Western Conference pick now.
Yeah, I got turned off with Denver with this. I think that Durant's going to put Phoenix over the top. I really do. I still like Denver. I think that they're fantastic, but the key to Denver is Michael Porter Jr. That's damn scary if you're picking them to win the finals, right?
I can't wait to see.
Up and down.
Yeah, I can't wait to see Phoenix play. Now, I think it's going to be really interesting watching them play.
Phoenix and Dallas play on March 5th. That's going to be fascinating.
Yeah, I can't wait. Cannot wait for that game. Man, I have that one circled. The NBA should promote the hell out of that game.
Yes.
That should be fun. Yeah, I think it's still the landscape looks really good for the Celtics, for sure. No one in the East really stood out, but I think there's still, a bunch of teams you can say we have a legitimate chance to win the NBA title, especially now in the West, where we were looking at it looked like the Denver Nuggets Invitational. Now it looks a lot less like that. So we have so much more to talk about. So we're going to be doing more podcasts, obviously. So stay tuned to our social medias at JohnSapp25, at JetStryer. Thanks to Full Press Coverage for presenting us. Check out their website for all sorts of great content and the show and articles and stuff like that. And we'll be back soon. This is the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. Make sure you type that in to find the podcast wherever. And we'll be back later talking about all the fallout from the trade deadline and all sorts of NBA news. So stick with us and we will talk to you later. See you, everybody.